Recently, my son and I embarked on an exciting new journey, moving to another country to embrace a fresh, upscale life. This opportunity arose unexpectedly when my son inherited a staggering $12 million. However, his grandmother ominously warned that if we ever parted ways, the money might not last. Even more bizarre, she claimed that if I wanted to stay in contact with them, I would have to humble myself to an uncomfortable degree. Perplexed by her harsh words, I asked for clarification. Up until that moment, I had no idea about the inheritance or plans to relocate. She coldly revealed that their plan was for my husband and son to live a life of luxury overseas without me. I was left speechless, wondering why my husband would make such drastic decisions without even a word to me, and why there was such secrecy surrounding the money. Her demand that I degrade myself just to get answers felt both insulting and unnecessary. A whirlwind of emotions surged: anger, confusion, and worry. Yet, I knew I had to keep my composure and unravel what was happening. How had my husband come into such a large sum, and what were the consequences? As a manager at a prominent tech company, where I had first met my husband, I'm used to problem-solving under pressure. His lively personality and ambition had captivated me early on, leading to our marriage. His parents welcomed me warmly at first, which makes his mother's behavior now even more puzzling. Together, we have a 12-year-old daughter. Having grown up in difficult circumstances, I've always been determined to provide a nurturing and stable environment for her, all while balancing the demands of work. Then, when a project required my husband to move to Oklahoma, the idea of managing everything alone was overwhelming. This is going to be tough without you, I admitted, worried about the added pressure. He suggested his mother come stay with us to help during his absence. Reluctantly, I agreed, hoping her presence would ease the burden, but I never imagined things would take such a strange turn. When is Daddy coming back? My daughter asked, her eyes brimming with the kind of innocent worry only a child can express. He'll be in Oklahoma a little longer, but don't worry, Grandma is coming to stay with us, I assured her, putting on a brave face despite my own growing unease. When my mother-in-law moved in, I had no idea that this decision would lead to some of the most challenging days of my life. Each evening as I came home from work, I was met not with a warm welcome but with harsh criticism. Working late again? Women who neglect their families, she would mutter, her words sharp and piercing. I have a job too and I'm taking care of our daughter, I would respond, frustration bubbling beneath my calm exterior, but nothing seemed to meet her approval. In my day, family came first. I never even considered working outside the home, she'd say dismissively, her nostalgia for the past evident in her tone. One day, after my daughter had achieved a notable success at school, my mother-in-law declared, "It's all thanks to me. What purpose do you serve? Maybe we don't need you here." Her words cut deeply, especially since I was the one who had tutored our daughter in most of her subjects. Even minor mishaps while cooking would prompt her criticism. How did you and my son even manage with such poor cooking skills? Exasperated, I'd retort, "I'm doing my best. Everyone has their own way of doing things." My patience was wearing thin. She would call my husband, painting me in the worst possible light. "Mom, she's working too. Please try to understand," he'd say, his voice a comforting presence despite the distance. As we continued living together, the tension between my mother-in-law and me grew more intense. With my husband away, I felt increasingly isolated. One night, overwhelmed by the strain, I decided to call him. "Hello, are you okay?" he answered, his voice heavy with sleep. "Yeah, I'm fine. It's just that your mom has been giving me a hard time about the house chores again, and it's really wearing me down," I explained, frustration clear in my tone. "I'm sorry. Mom's always been a bit sharp-tongued. Maybe she has a point, but don't let it get to you too much." Just keep doing things at your own pace, he reassured me. Feeling slightly better, I tried to carry on with our daily routine. However, with my husband miles away, the pressure from my mother-in-law only intensified. Each day felt longer than the last, and I became increasingly exhausted, clinging to the memories of him to get through. At first, I thought I could handle it, but her constant criticism became unbearable. From morning until night, she found fault in everything I did, leaving me overwhelmed and desperate for a break. Even when I cooked my husband's favorite rice dish, she dismissed it with, "This tastes terrible. Who could eat this?" Whenever I took a short break, she would scold me. How can a woman who can't even manage household chores take a break? I wasn't very confident about my housekeeping skills, but my husband had always laughed off my mistakes. With her, however, the pressure to be perfect was unrelenting. I came to believe that her harsh treatment stemmed from her deep affection for her son and her struggle to accept that he had married and moved away. This experience has only strengthened my resolve never to become an overbearing parent like her. One day, after treating myself to a modest shopping spree at the local mall, I came home to find her waiting at the entrance, furious. "How could you go out and have fun while your husband isn't home? What about the household chores?" she demanded. "I thought I needed a little break," I said, hoping my mother-in-law would understand, but she dismissed my feelings outright, blaming all our troubles on my supposed incompetence. Desperate for some support, I eagerly awaited a call from my husband, hoping his voice might lift my spirits. However, the news he shared was anything but comforting. "I have some bad news," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Work in Oklahoma isn't going well. I got into gambling, and now I'm in serious financial trouble. I've accumulated a lot of debt." Stunned and anxious, I responded, "Are you serious? Gambling and debt? This is completely unacceptable. What about our future and our daughter?" "I'm really sorry," he said, his voice filled with remorse. "I feel trapped right now, but I promise I'll figure it out." Overwhelmed, I asked, "How do you plan to fix this? How much do you owe?" I had always seen my husband as honest and sincere, punctual for our dates, always coming straight home from work, and showing gratitude for every meal I prepared and every chore I took on. His sincerity was one of the reasons I fell in love with him, but with him away and enduring relentless criticism from my mother-in-law, life had become unbearable. "I can't believe someone as useless as you married my son," she would say, her harsh words digging deep and furthering my despair. Since my husband began working remotely, I had faced a constant barrage of blame and criticism from her. His recent confession about his debts and gambling had only added to my burden, making it all feel like too much to bear. One night, overwhelmed by the weight of everything, I left the house and found myself crying alone on a park bench, the weight of everything feeling too heavy to bear. Things took a turn for the worse when my mother-in-law dredged up a long-buried secret from my past during one of our dinners. "So, I hear you used to work in a nightclub," she sneered, her voice laced with disdain. "It's shameful that you're raising my grandchild after working in such a place." Shocked and humiliated, I asked, "How did you find out about that?" "I was talking to an acquaintance about how useless my son's wife is and showed them a picture of you. They recognized you. Apparently, you weren't even good at that nightclub job," she taunted. Before I met my husband, I had worked in a nightclub during a time when I struggled financially and received no support from my family, who were more interested in partying than working. It was a part of my life I thought my husband didn't know about, and now hearing it used against me by my mother-in-law left me utterly speechless. "I can't believe someone like you is the mother of my grandchild. I'll tell my son and have you kicked out," she threatened. Her words plunged me deeper into despair, making it feel as though all my efforts in our marriage and the future I had envisioned were being dismantled. Communication with my husband became sparse, and I feared he might start doubting me due to the seeds of distrust his mother was planting. Alone in my room one night, I reflected on my life, how I met my husband, our marriage, and the relentless struggles exacerbated by my mother-in-law's constant blame and accusations. I can't take it anymore, I whispered to myself, stepping out into the quiet, desolate streets. The silence around me seemed to mirror my despair, and my mother-in-law's cruel words and unending criticism became almost unbearable. 2. I ended up on a park bench, staring blankly at the night sky, which was devoid of stars. My heart felt just as dark and empty. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through my thoughts. "Mom, why are you here?" It was my daughter, her presence a soothing comfort. She sat down beside me and took my hand. "Mom, don't let Grandma get to you," she said gently, her words a balm to my aching heart. Despite everything, her simple act of kindness reminded me of the strength I had within me. We both knew life had been hard, and her recognition of my efforts, silent though it was, reaffirmed why I had to keep going. I worked at an international electronics company, and my job had always been a source of pride and independence, something my mother-in-law couldn't take away. As we sat together, the weight of her harsh words began to lift slightly, replaced by a renewed sense of determination. "You've been through so much. You're strong," my daughter said, her voice filled with admiration. "Thank you, but maybe Grandma has a point," I replied hesitantly. "Mom, Grandma's just stuck in the past. In today's world, you should be proud of any job you've done. I'm proud you worked at a nightclub," she reassured me sincerely. "Really?" "Yes, because it shows you've always tried your best for us. No matter the circumstances, don't let Grandma's words control you." Her words touched my heart deeply, bringing tears to my eyes. "Mom, you're working hard now, right? That's amazing. I'll always be on your side, no matter what Grandma says." Her support filled me with gratitude and hope. With her encouragement, I felt renewed strength to face the challenges ahead. Later, in my husband's study, I took a deep breath and began sorting through a stack of paperwork. I carefully examined each document, bank statements, credit card bills, loan agreements. Slowly, the extent of his financial troubles started to become clearer. Why had this happened? I discovered several receipts from gambling, horse racing, slot machines, and casinos. It was heartbreaking to see how much money he had squandered. I then turned on my husband's computer. The password was his birthday, reversed. His inbox was flooded with collection emails from financial institutions and messages from friends demanding repayment. There were also countless promotional emails from gambling-related websites. Determined to get a clear picture, I calculated the total amount he had spent on gambling, a staggering $12 million, far more than I had ever imagined. Panic set in briefly, but I knew I had to act quickly. I began planning how to secure funds to support our livelihood. I reviewed my savings, considered selling our expensive electronics and luxury items, and assessed the money I had set aside from my salary. I continued my investigation daily, contacting financial institutions to understand the full extent of my husband's debts and obtaining his credit information. After a few days of intense work, I devised a plan. I resolved to build a life independent of my husband and mother-in-law. Leveraging my background in the IT industry, I started taking on freelance projects. Over several days, I built a portfolio and signed up on a freelance job platform. Soon, I received my first client request. The project offered a modest but important contribution to our living expenses and provided me with a sense of control over our future. Amidst juggling freelance projects, I meticulously reviewed our household finances. I canceled unnecessary subscriptions, trimmed down on spending, and found ways to cut grocery costs, significantly reducing our daily food expenses. Following tips from local moms, I also participated in a community yard sale, selling high-end items and surplus electronics, which brought in a substantial amount. A few weeks later, my freelance work began to pay off, and my income stabilized. I had accumulated enough in my bank account to comfortably cover our living expenses. One day, upon returning home, I noticed that all my mother-in-law's belongings were gone. Just then, my phone rang. It was her. "Oh, are you back already? You must have noticed our stuff is gone," she said, her tone brimming with satisfaction. "What are you trying to say?" I asked, puzzled. "My son and I are starting a luxurious life abroad with his $12 million. If you ever think of divorcing him, you won't be able to make it on your own. If you want our new address, get on your knees and lick my shoes," she demanded, her words dripping with disdain. I couldn't help but chuckle at her audacity. "Actually, that $12 million is a debt," I informed her calmly. "Stop joking. There's no way my son has that kind of debt," she retorted, her disbelief evident. "You might not believe it, but it's true. In his study, I found transaction records from banks and financial institutions, credit card bills, contracts, and more. On his PC, there are collection emails from financial institutions, messages from friends demanding repayment, and promotional emails from gambling sites. If you don't believe me, why don't you check?" I suggested, my voice steady. "You're lying," she exclaimed, her voice rising. "It's all the result of his gambling addiction, horse racing, slot machines, casinos. The total amounts to a staggering $12 million. I just sent you photos of the evidence. Maybe you should take a look," I said, my tone unwavering. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. I left the house and found myself crying alone on a park bench. The weight of everything seemed to press down on me, and things took a turn for the worse when my mother-in-law dredged up a long-buried secret from my past during one of our dinners. "So, I heard you used to work in a nightclub," she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "Shame on you for raising my grandchild after working in such a place." Shocked and humiliated, I asked, "How did you find out about that?" "I was complaining about how useless my son's wife is and showed a picture of you to an acquaintance. They recognized you. Apparently, you weren't even good at that nightclub job," she taunted, her words like daggers. Before meeting my husband, I had worked in a nightclub to make ends meet, as my own family was unsupportive and focused on their own indulgences. It was a chapter one had kept hidden, one I believed my husband knew nothing about. Hearing my mother-in-law use this against me was devastating. "I can't believe someone like you is the mother of my grandchild. I'll tell my son and have you kicked out," she threatened. Her words deepened my despair, making it feel as though all my efforts in our marriage and my future dreams were unraveling. With communication between my husband and me growing rare, I feared he might start doubting me, thanks to the seeds of distrust she was sowing. Alone in my room that night, I reflected on my life, meeting my husband, our marriage, and the relentless struggles fueled by my mother-in-law's criticisms. "I can't take it anymore," I whispered to myself, stepping out into the quiet, desolate nighttime streets. The silence around me seemed to echo my profound sadness, and my mother-in-law's haunting words about my past became almost unbearable. 3. I ended up on a park bench, staring blankly at the sky where not a single star was visible. My heart felt just as dark and empty. Suddenly, a familiar voice broke through my thoughts. "Mom, why are you here?" It was my daughter, her presence a sudden comfort. She sat next to me and took my hand. "Mom, don't let Grandma get to you," she said gently, her words soothing my aching heart. Despite everything, her simple act of kindness reminded me of the strength I had within me. We both knew life had been hard, and her recognition of my efforts, even if unspoken, was enough to remind me why I needed to keep going. I worked at an international electronics company, a source of pride and independence that my mother-in-law couldn't take away. As we sat there, the weight of her harsh words began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of resolve. "You've been through so much. You're strong." "Thank you, but maybe Grandma has a point," I replied hesitantly. "Mom, Grandma's just stuck in the past. In today's world, you should be proud of any job you've done." "I'm proud you worked at a nightclub," she reassured me earnestly. "Really?" "Yes, because it shows you've always tried your best for us. No matter the circumstances, don't let Grandma's words control you." My daughter's words touched my heart deeply, bringing tears to my eyes. "Mom, you're working hard now, right? That's amazing. I'll always be on your side, no matter what Grandma says." Her words filled me with gratitude and hope. With my daughter's support, I felt stronger, ready to face the challenges ahead. Later, back in my husband's study, I took a deep breath before diving into a pile of paperwork. I meticulously reviewed each document: bank statements, credit card bills, loan agreements. Slowly, the full extent of my husband's financial situation began to come into focus. Why did this happen? As I dug through the pile of documents, the truth began to unfold. I discovered numerous receipts for gambling activities, horse racing, slot machines, and casinos. It was heart-wrenching to see just how much money my husband had squandered. Next, I turned on his computer, using his reversed birthday as the password. His inbox was flooded with collection emails from financial institutions and desperate messages from friends demanding repayment. There were also countless promotional emails from gambling sites. Determined to understand the full extent of the damage, I calculated the total amount spent on gambling. It was an astonishing $12 million, far beyond what I had anticipated. The sheer scale of it left me momentarily paralyzed, but I knew I had to act quickly. I began to strategize on how to secure funds for our future. I considered my savings, the potential proceeds from selling our luxury items and electronics, and the money I had set aside from my salary. I continued my investigation diligently, reaching out to financial institutions to grasp the full extent of my husband's debts and acquiring his credit information. A few days later, I crafted a plan. I aimed to build a life where I was independent of both my husband and mother-in-law. Leveraging my IT background, I decided to take on freelance projects. For several days, I developed a portfolio and signed up on a freelance job website. Shortly thereafter, I received my first client request. This work would not only help with our living expenses but also provide me with a sense of autonomy and control over our future. In the midst of juggling freelance projects, I meticulously reviewed our household finances. I canceled unnecessary subscriptions, trimmed down on spending, and found ways to cut grocery costs, encouraged by advice from local moms. I also participated in a community yard sale, where I sold high-end items and surplus electronics, earning a substantial sum. A few weeks later, my freelance work began to pay off. I felt my income stabilizing and had accumulated enough in my bank account to comfortably cover our living expenses. With a renewed sense of control and hope, I faced each day with determination, ready to rebuild our lives on my own terms. One day, when I came home, I was startled to find that all of my mother-in-law's belongings were gone. Just then, my phone rang. It was her. "Oh, you're back already? I see you've noticed our things are missing," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to make sense of the situation. "My son and I are starting a lavish new life abroad with his $12 million. If you ever think of divorcing him, you'll be left with nothing. If you want our new address, you'll have to get on your knees and beg," she said with a tone of contempt. I couldn't help but laugh at her audacity. "Actually, that $12 million is just debt," I replied calmly. "That's not possible. There's no way my son has such debt." She shot back, incredulous. "You might not want to believe it, but it's true. I've seen the transaction records, bank statements, credit card bills, and contracts." His computer was full of collection emails from financial institutions, messages from friends demanding repayment, and promotional emails from gambling sites. "I've sent you photos of the evidence. You should take a look," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're lying," she protested. "It's all a result of his gambling addiction, horse racing, slot machines, casinos. The total is an overwhelming $12 million. I've already sent you the proof. Maybe you should review it," I said, maintaining my calm demeanor. After examining the evidence, my mother-in-law finally conceded. "I had no idea. He probably kept it from you too, but the facts remain." As the gravity of the situation sunk in for her, I continued to focus on how to address the enormous debt. The road ahead seemed challenging, but it was clear that I needed a structured plan to manage our finances and possibly negotiate with creditors. Despite this upheaval, I was determined to navigate through this financial storm, whether or not they offered any assistance. "I guess I don't need to worry about that anymore," I said, letting the reality of the situation settle in. There was a heavy silence on the line as my mother-in-law grappled with the shocking revelation. "I truly didn't know. I don't know what to say," she finally admitted. Without another word, I ended the call. From that moment on, I resolved to start anew. Despite the shock of my husband and mother-in-law's actions, I knew I had to move forward, not just for my sake but for my daughter's as well. Later, my husband called. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I'm so sorry. Truly, I am," he apologized. But my anger remained. "How did it come to this? Our family is falling apart because of you. I never imagined it would get this bad. When I decided to go overseas with Mom, I couldn't see a future with you and our daughter," he confessed. His words left me stunned. "You couldn't see? It's your recklessness and lack of planning that brought us to this point," I accused. "I understand that, but it's too late now. I made a promise to Mom," he replied. "What promise?" I demanded, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. "You want to sacrifice our daughter's future and secure paradise just for yourselves?" He admitted to the harsh reality of his choices. There was a heavy silence before I gathered my words. "Did you ever truly love our family?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I did, but now it's different," he responded, his voice breaking as he began to cry. "Don't hurt us any further. My daughter and I will move forward on our own. We'll leave you behind," I declared firmly. There was no response from him, only the sound of his sobbing. I hung up the phone with a sense of finality. The entire ordeal began with a shocking $12 million bill arriving at our home. My mother-in-law, mistaking it for a lottery-winning notice, began plotting to move overseas, completely oblivious to the true nature of the debt. My husband, believing that starting a new life abroad would solve his gambling problems, agreed to her plan, exacerbating the misunderstanding. After that unsettling conversation, I put aside my anger and began seeking legal counsel. I was determined to prepare for a divorce, aiming to secure compensation for emotional distress and child support. A new chapter was about to begin for me, a chapter where I could rebuild and provide a stable environment for my daughter, away from the chaos and pain of the past. As I worked towards independence from my husband and mother-in-law, I consulted a lawyer to navigate the complexities of divorce, emotional distress claims, and child support. During this tumultuous period, my daughter and I grew incredibly close. She became my greatest ally, understanding my decision to divorce and standing by me unwaveringly. Her support was a source of immense comfort, making the hardships we faced seem more manageable and filling me with profound gratitude. Meanwhile, Life abroad proved far from idyllic for my mother-in-law and husband. Their initial excitement was quickly overshadowed by the harsh realities of their situation. Their lack of preparation and ongoing financial troubles led to a series of misfortunes, including being pickpocketed and losing their remaining funds. Struggling with the language barrier only added to their difficulties. Eventually, their situation worsened, culminating in their deportation for overstaying their visas. Back home, I worked diligently with my lawyers to finalize the terms of the divorce. My husband agreed to a lump sum payment for emotional distress and child support. "Thank you. Now I can finally start a new chapter in my life," I said, feeling a sense of relief. Considering the practicality of his financial situation, I suggested, "Wouldn't it be better if the payments were made in installments?" He admitted. I ended up taking on even more debt, borrowing from some shady loan shark. I didn't press him further. By then, I had distanced myself from his troubles. After being evicted from her rental property and losing all her savings to pickpockets, my mother-in-law returned to the US and ended up homeless. As for my daughter and me, we embarked on our new life. It wasn't always easy, but free from the turmoil caused by my husband and mother-in-law, we looked to the future with hope. I was committed to living happily, working closely with my daughter, who had been my beacon of strength. Together, we were building a life rooted in our resilience.